So good afternoon, everybody. I want to talk about a video that I saw about James Romero, and he was talking about like why did AEW Brisbane, have really bad ticket sales. And I want to talk a little bit about him first. I really enjoy his videos. He's very articulate. I also appreciate that with AEW and other wrestling shows, he's willing to do like research, like find ticket sales or have connections in certain cities, like Australia, certain countries like Australia, Brisbane, Sydney, cities and countries, and just know what's really going on, really. So he does his. He's very well researched, and he also has like a really good voice and stuff like that. He's also like somebody that I like a lot. He's very very consistent. Because whenever I do like a commentary video or response video, I always want to put everybody over and talk about what I like about them, like positive energy. And I agree with all of his points, but I want to like add my own points as well. So he was talking about that what happened for the Brisbane show is that last year, I think they had like 11,000 or 12,000 seats for Brisbane, and they didn't sell that well this year. I'm not sure what the exact number was for the Brisbane house show. And also they said things too, like I think they said like maybe 25% of the front row section was full, so they had to upgrade people's tickets for the Brisbane house show. And then also got to a point where they're like, oh fuck it, we're gonna actually sell a bunch of free tickets and everything like that. So I want to talk more about the Brisbane show, and I think one of the big questions we all have to ask ourselves is what does Tony Khan do for AEW? How many hats does he wear? Because look at someone like Gordon Ramsay, in Hell's Kitchen. He leads Hell's Kitchen. He is a chef for Hell's Kitchen. He's a manager for Hell's Kitchen, and it's his job to mentor those people, and that's it really. He has other responsibilities there, really, but it's not like, he has to cook maybe over 100 dishes a night, really. He has a team of people doing that. Like, the team is responsible for working under him, and he's responsible for being the manager of that team, really. So that's an example of something that's very functional. While Gordon Ramsay knows his role, and everybody who works in Hell's Kitchen knows their role. It's two teams of people, and they serve I think each team serves 100 people every episode, really. But when you look at Tony Khan, you got to ask yourself, is he doing too much for AEW? I think he manages the Jacksonville Jaguars. He might have a few other businesses. He writes television, and then you have to kind of wonder if he's in charge of other departments like marketing. So, was he just way too busy? And maybe because the problem is that there's people like me, and I'm planning a trip to Tokyo. I'm going to Rhode Island to review a burger restaurant this week. I'm working 260 hours a month. Next week, I'm going to go to Trenton for a few days, reviewing NJPW, New Beginning USA. I'm going to review the Combat Zone wrestling shows. I'm reviewing the Japanese anime noir. I got to plan my budget. I owe my friend Wesley some money. So the point of it is that I'm a very busy guy. I can't really do everything. I feel very boxed in, and that might be the issue with Tony Khan, is that he might feel very boxed in. He might do too much, and he might not. And I think he might have a power phobia. He's a little bit afraid of saying, okay, what would happen if he had a couple of people, as I said, if he hired hypothetically a Jim Cornette, and Jim Cornette was in charge of marketing some of the events, or you had somebody like Jeff Jarrett who's in charge of marketing the events, or you have some wrestlers who are, like Christopher Daniels, who retired, or other people like that. Is he doing too much for AEW? He has to understand that he can't really, that to run an empire, you got to have a lot of great generals, or sometimes an emperor has to have a lot of kings, really, to help, a lot of kings and queens under him to run the empire. So I think that's one of the biggest issues. And I think the next big issue is that they really didn't act like the house show meant anything, really. And what I want to say about this is that the Sydney show that they did last night, they advertised it. They had matches that were consequential to Revolution. You had MJF. You had a lot of big stars on this. For the house show, there really wasn't a lot of advertisements. So I think that they probably said, okay, you know what, we're not going to do a night one and night two, really, you know. So I think that's also was a huge problem as well, really, because they kind of said to themselves, we're not going to make this show matter. So why would anybody want to go to a house show if it's not going to matter, really? Or I remember, like, for WWE, when they had a show in Bridgeport, they did a house show, but they advertised Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre in a steel cage heavyweight championship match, and they advertised a few other people with name power. So people felt like, okay, well, I paid $150 for that show, so I kind of said to myself, you know what? I live in New Haven, Connecticut. It's gonna be like maybe a $200 night between travel, food, and then going to and from Bridgeport. Now, if they did something like they had, you know, Santino Marella versus, like they did Santino Marella versus R-Truth, and that was the main event, really, because they wanted to just be like, okay, we're not really going to care. Then would I want to go down to Bridgeport? No. If you're not going to care, people are not going to buy, really, and that's kind of one of the biggest issues, is that if you're not going to care, people are not going to buy, really. And that's also kind of like the issue with WrestleMania. They're charging big ticket prices, but a lot of people feel that this WrestleMania is not going to be that consequential, really. So why would I pay $600 for nosebleed seats? The Rock is going to look like a rock if he shows up, really, for my vision, really. So people are like that as well, really, where fans are like that. If you're not going to put in the effort, why should I care about coming to an event, really? So those are like two big issues. Is that I think the first one is Tony Khan might be too busy. They didn't care about the Brisbane show. And then I think the third issue is that fans are going to be very responsive, and they're going to be like, hey, if you don't care, why the fuck should I go? The next big thing is that, and I've also scrutinized AEW for this, is that they do way too many special shows. You did World's End in Chicago, then you did Maximum Carnage in Phoenix. Usually the first show of the year is called Fight for the Fallen. And then you also have the Australia Grand Slam. We had Australia Grand Slam Sydney, Australia Grand Slam Brisbane. And then the next couple of weeks, you don't have an event until Revolution, which is good, really. So the problem is that sometimes when you have way too many special shows, you may do something like say, hey, I want every show to feel a little special, so I'm actually going to like do something where maybe if a show could be a pay-per-view, I'm not going to make it a pay-per-view or whatever, really. So I really think that maybe for like the house show, I think a fun project for anybody would be like, hey, how should they should have booked this? I really would have said they should have done like maybe like 12 matches, 6 matches for Sydney Grand Slam and 6 matches for Brisbane Grand Slam, and do like a 2-night WrestleMania or 2-night special show, almost like maybe like not like a WrestleMania type of thing, really, but you kind of get my point. Really, like 2 nights of really great wrestling. That's how I would have done that. So I think that's also the other point, is that I think that they didn't book the Brisbane show that well, really. I think honestly you should have done Swerve versus Omega in Brisbane, and you should have had like other things on the card. And like as I said, everything you should have had should have been like, okay, we can follow this up at Revolution, really. We should turn the Australia show into the Grand Slam Australia show into a pay-per-view and make money off of that. And if they marketed it well and they cared about it, then people would see the improvements. The other big thing I've kind of said, but also, as I said before, we have way too many special shows, or you throw way too many special matches on television or for special show events, then you don't have like things that you can use, really. Like Omega and Swerve could have main evented, could honestly have main evented Grand Slam Sydney Grand Slam, Brisbane last night if they actually cared. I also will say I think another issue is that going to Australia was a really bad idea, because they had, I think they get like 20,000 people, they said, would be watching AEW in Brisbane, in Australia. And the thing about that is, sorry guys, I have a cold. The thing about that is, why would you go to a place when 20,000 people are watching your product? That makes no sense, really. I mean, I think like the best example is look at TNA wrestling. I think they're like I think they're around like 100, 200,000 people. But what would happen if they wanted to do a show in Alaska, or they wanted to do a show in Wyoming, like the least populated state, or they wanted to do a show in Hawaii or something like that, or what would happen if they want to do a show in South Korea or something like that. Really, there's certain times where you have to say, hey, you know what? Why are we going to these places when not a lot of people are watching, really? And if we go to these places, shouldn't we give like our best effort, really, to say, hey, you know what? This is why you should be watching weekly television. Hey, this is why this matters, really. So I think because you look at WWE, they do good ratings around the world, and definitely when they went to Perth last year, they had so many people. But the point of it is that WWE would never go to Alaska, or they would never go to like Hawaii, or they would never go to like Wyoming, because obviously they know that the markets are not good there. Or like there's a reason why you don't see a WWE show in Cuba, like because obviously you know what, you got to know your markets very, very well, really. And I think that's kind of one of the big problems with AEW is that they may be like, okay, well, we did Australia last year, let's go back again. Like, for example, I really, last year, I think like 2 years ago, they were experimenting and they went to South Dakota. And I went to South Dakota to their Collision show just because I had to go to visit all 50 states, but there's a reason why Tony Khan was being nice to the audience, saying, hey, we'll be back in South Dakota. They didn't draw that well, so do you think he's going to do a pay-per-view in Sioux Falls, South Dakota? Absolutely not. He's going to keep going to Chicago because they draw very well there, really. Or I love St. Louis, but they are going to go back to they will go back to St. Louis probably the next 1 or 2 years, really. And I pray for that because St. Louis is one of my favorite American cities. I pray for that. Keep my fingers crossed. But you don't go to places where you're not doing that well in the ratings, really. And I also think the other thing too, with AEW, and I've kind of said this before, is that I really think that sometimes they might have a let's give up attitude, and I think they're doing that a lot more, where they might be like, okay, well the show's not selling, we will not be motivated to do our best, really. And I think that's kind of what happened with the Brisbane show. They might be like, oh well, we're not getting good ticket sales, so we're not going to care, or we're not going to like say, hey, you know what, we're going to make this a television special. We're going to talk to TNT, do a Sunday night Collision. It's going to be televised, so we got to give our biggest effort. So I really think that's kind of been a huge issue with AEW, and I think that's kind of the issue with Tony Khan is that I think he does have a lot of insecurities and a lot of anxiety and other things like that. And I think that it's like what OTRS Central said, that sometimes what determines how good you are is what you do when you struggle. And then the other thing is that, in order to be a master of anything, you have to go through a struggle. Or sometimes what happens in life is that things work out, and then there's a point where it doesn't work out. And that's the way of life testing you. Like I used to do filmmaking for the 48-hour film project, but I remember how I would do film after film, have a great time, and then I ran into my New Haven community where there's a lot of snobby people, racist people, other people like that, and I kind of had to learn two directions with my film career. I had to get bigger and better, and I also had to learn, you got to really judge a film community. And I didn't do that, and I paid the price for that. But the point of it is that I think with Tony Khan is that I really think that he's kind of lost the ball. I think that when they lose or when they're not successful in a certain area, they just have a psychology of, well, it's almost like being a general in a it's almost like being a general of an army. You might say, okay, well these 100 people are going to lose the battle. Screw them. Let's go on to another thing. You're not going to salvage. You're not going to try when you're not going to try anymore, really. And I think that that's kind of where that's kind of one of the reasons why a lot of people are kind of disillusioned with AEW, because they're kind of almost in like loser mode, where they're kind of like, okay, well, if it's not working out, if we're not getting good ticket sales, we're just not going to care and count our losses. But that's just what you never do, really. You have to go bigger and better, really. The other thing that I will say is that is that I'm going to Combat Zone Wrestling, and one thing about Combat Zone Wrestling is they have their anniversary show March 1st, but what they're doing is that they have a show called Backlight on February 28th, really. So they have a couple of hardcore off the wall matches, and then also too they have like they're defending a couple of titles. And I think they're doing an inaugural. I think they're bringing back like a certain like Combat Zone Wrestling title. But the point of it is that they're like, okay, well, we're not going to do a show on Saturday. That's going to be, a fuck off show. We got to do a show that's going to matter, that's going to have some consequences. That's going to like be like, okay, well, if you like what you're seeing here, then tomorrow night when we have our anniversary show, it matters really. So that's kind of like, and then also Combat Zone Wrestling, they're talking about doing Combat Zone Wrestling Tournament of Death, like two of them, one in the USA and one in in the United Kingdom this year. But a lot of people like the independents, like, because there's some companies like that kind of say, hey, you know what, we really, really have to matter. We really, really have to earn trust with people. And I think that's kind of like the issue, because you look at something like AEW, like obviously they really have to work on their markets a lot more. And I think that with Australia, they've kind of proven like 2 years in a row that they might have some loser talk with that. They might be like, okay, this show's not selling in Brisbane, so we're going to do like a house show and we're going to do some fuckery where everybody's doing like a native Australian dance or something like that at the end of it. When they could have done something like say, okay, you know what, this show's not selling well, but let's do more advertisements. Let's get more people on the card. Let's have matches that are consequential, and we'll just we'll take it from there really. Or we'll say something like, okay, maybe next year, and I've kind of said this, maybe next year should be the following year, they go to Australia, and I think that they should do a pay-per-view next year. Like go back to Sydney, do a pay-per-view, and then that's that really. And if they draw like 8,000 or more, then you can keep going back every single year. But if they don't do that, and if it's like not that well, then you gotta say, okay, you know what, we're not gonna do Australia again. But I really, really feel that they need to keep going bigger and better. I think that, as I said, that what I will give credit for AEW for, and I think a lot of people have to give them credit for, is that they did a massive improvement from last year. They had matches that mattered. They talked about it on AEW television. They had their champion over. And then also, too, that they had the right size arena, really. Like last year, they got a 50,000 seat arena, and they downgraded to a 10,000 seat. This one, I think they had like maybe a 10,000 or 12,000 seat arena. And they didn't do well with tickets, but like 7,000 out of like a 12,000 seat arena is not that bad, really. But definitely, they lost like maybe 33% of people and stuff like that. But as I said, if you care, people will show up, really. If you want to do your best and you give a fuck, and if things are not working out and you give a fuck about making good quality stuff, that attracts people. And that was really what AEW was founded on. It was founded on that WWE has not been doing things the right way for a very long time. And now they're really much a cash grab, and they overcharge people. And they don't give people that much opportunities because with WWE, remember for the longest time, they had a lot of wrestlers do stupid comedy and other shit like that. But that's what AEW has always been founded on. It's been founded on being alternative. It's been founded on emphasizing wrestling and more wrestlers having freedom in their matches. It's been, it's a competitive place because people get paid well there. And it's also a place for wrestlers to say, hey, if it doesn't work out in WWE, I can go to AEW. And it's also been founded on that we care about wrestling, where WWE's gone more corporate, or it's more about what Vince and Hunter want, really. But I think with AEW, they kind of lost that. And I understand it's part of its fatigue because, I think the Young Bucks and Tony Khan and everybody didn't realize that sometimes that happens in business where, you're excited. It's a new car smell. Once you start a business, you're very motivated, and then it becomes the regular. And then when it becomes the regular, you're not going to care as much, really. But a good business person would always think about, okay, what improvements do I need to make every single year? What failures did I have? How can I improve from those failures? And I really think, as I said, I think the biggest thing with AEW is that they really should give the Australia show one more chance, do a pay-per-view next year, and they really should even say, hey, you know what, how we're going to market this, who's actually in charge of the marketing, who's in charge of like making a budget for marketing, who's in charge of booking and everything like that, really, and are those people really doing their jobs, or is it at a point where if it's all just on Tony and he can't manage it, then people have to be like, okay, you know what, he needs to be removed from power, or they need to kind of cut his power a little bit. And that's maybe a choice he needs to make, really, because obviously, as I said, like I used to do filmmaking, but I used to do too many roles, really. But people stayed with me because I was a nice guy. But then it got to a point where people were like, nah, we can't work with you anymore because you know what, you just don't know how to work with others. You need to, like, as I said, an emperor needs many kings running. An emperor needs many kings and queens running the empire. So those are my thoughts really about why Brisbane didn't sell well.